Hello, I hope you've had a good day and enjoyed the snow. Meanwhile, I'm glad you're here to look at what is a two different video PowerPoints on Chapter 4. I'm not going to read everything. I'm going to try and step through this. I've put a copy of this in a regular format on Blackboard so that you can print out these slides if you wish. And so we'll go through this pretty rapidly. Part 1 deals with the learning objectives, and I always start with the so what. Why do we care about the structure of the U.S. government? Well, as business people, we have to operate in a legal environment. And all business decisions you're going to find have legal implications. The question is, and this is where I think business people are really at a disadvantage in this kind of economy under this political situation we face now in 2014, is that government is expanding, and aggressively so, to regulate and set priorities for the economy. So if you're going to be effective in business, you're going to have to understand how these regulations and rules come together and what you can do to influence them. As you studied in high school, there are 3 branches of government. Now, why do we have the 3 branches? Because, frankly, our founding fathers wanted to checkmate each branch so that no particular leader of a branch of government could become a tyrant and take over. Again, this whole exceptionalism thing, where Americans were the first grouping of people to say, you know, we don't want to serve a ruler. We're going to elect people and they're going to serve us because we have certain unalienable rights, and these people largely were Christian-type people, and they believed in a deity, or at least some of the founding fathers did, and this was sort of built into this radical concept that the people are not subjects to a king. The king or the government should be serving the people. So look at this list and you'll see how the structures, the restrictions are put so that each branch cannot overtake the other. Now, the basic lesson here that we often forget is that the one purpose that the Constitution says is the key reason for having a federal government as opposed to just a grouping of sovereign states was to provide for the common defense. You see, Washington and the others were very worried that England or even the ally France could aspire to take the colonies or the newly formed U.S. government, take it over by military force. So they realized that each state could not defend itself against a superior enemy, but they could win if all states contributed to one army with one leader. They needed a national currency in order to have that army get paid and be able to spend their money in the different states that they were defending. So guess what? You know, they turned out to be right about their fear. The War of 1812 was won, and it was won because we had a national government and the ability to rally a defense organized with all of the states pooling together. Now, this 4th branch you've read about is really the president, and the president has a cabinet which he selects those people. They get confirmed by the government, but he selects them, and they manage the federal bureaucracies. Recently, you might have heard Obama's State of the Union address, in which he said, I will issue executive orders to my bureaucracies if Congress refuses to do what I want them to do. Don't overreact to that. All presidents can issue executive orders. He is in charge, after all, of these different federal agencies. The controversy now is whether Congress gave the president power to alter certain provisions of the laws. And that's what will be an issue politically. However, I'm not sure that it's really relevant because it's going to take years before This goes before courts, and by that time there's going to be a different president just because he served his 8 years. The role of Congress is to create laws. The president can't create laws, nor can the Supreme Court technically write their own law. They can turn down a law. They cannot enforce one and say it's unconstitutional, but they can't write their own laws. Only Congress can do that. Only Congress can actually create a budget. Now, if the president threatens to, he doesn't like the budget, then Congress is stuck with sort of passing what's called continuing resolutions that perpetuate the spending or confirm the spending at its current level. Congress technically defines what administrative powers are given to each agency. And these are the list of the different powers. There's something called the Administrative Procedures Act that was passed after World War II, I believe, for the purpose of giving a common vocabulary to what these powers are and what they mean. For example, some agencies only have investigative authority. That's the FBI, for example. They can't make any laws. Social Security Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, they have powers to do all of these things, but the one thing under the Constitution is they have to have different personnel. You can't have one guy writing the regulations and then investigating and then serving as a prosecutor and then also serving as an administrative law judge. Those have all got to be separate people to have due process. The implications for business. Okay, this is not in the textbook, but businesses join what are called trade associations, even though they compete with each other. And what those associations do from a legal perspective is they hire Washington law firms that track down the new laws and proposals and regulations. Then those trade associations may also hire lobbyists to inform Congress or agencies of the economic consequences of their regulations. I'd like to depart here and just tell an example. At one point, the Environmental Protection Agency found that the cleaning agent used by dry cleaners was extremely hazardous if you drink it or if you smell the vapors too much, and that it's quite volatile, very much a fire hazard. So they proposed to eliminate that chemical. Well, it turns out that the trade associations discovered this and did some research and found out that there was absolutely no other chemical than what they currently use to actually clean clothes. So all of your dry clean clothes you'd have to throw out, and the dry cleaning business would be completely dissolved. So that influenced Congress to change that proposal, and it influenced the administrative agency, the EPA. They took a second look and they decided, well, we'll put some other requirements in terms of employee exposure to the vapors. We'll require some fire safety equipment to shut down the machine if it happens to catch fire. So they dealt with the problems with the chemical, but they didn't abolish it, or they would have killed the industry. So lobbyists in the normal operations, they're really not evil, because for every lobbyist who wants something, there's another lobbyist who's against the proposal. So they're really just people that generally provide information. The exception is bribery. That is illegal. Key U.S. Supreme Court cases. Marbury versus Madison is where the U.S. Supreme Court decided that it alone had the power to interpret the U.S. Constitution in order to limit Congress and the President. Now, on page 90 of your text, take a look at the writing there about Gibbons versus Ogden. This gave the power to regulate interstate commerce, and that gave it to the national government. Otherwise, states were like nations, and many of the states, when the country was first formed, actually had import taxes against apples grown in New York Connecticut had a tax on them. So this was viewed as not very efficient and would interfere again with this issue that they needed all the states to cooperate to field an army to protect the country from being taken over again. I'll note that this is what the European community and the Euro policies are now just coming to do that in Europe. They've eliminated import taxes against each other. They've got free travel. You don't need visas to travel within the EU, and so on. For business, what's really critical to capitalism is the right of private property, because it's business under our system, not government, that has the right to determine what's produced. And you think about it, I made mention of this in class before, when you buy something, you're voting, frankly, on what's going to be produced. Now, banks in the U.S. are privately owned. They decide which businesses to loan money to. They really don't care about what political party you are or what your race or color or creed or anything. All they really care about is whether a party can pay off a loan. Investors now who give capital to a company to get it going, they're buying ownership, a piece of paper, stock certificate, with the hope of selling it after the business grows. So they are really not the key people who determine what's produced. It's the customers. I want to share the cookie story with you. If you have a cookie that sells wholesale for 50 cents, but it costs 30 cents to make it, and that includes the packaging, you've got a profit of 20 cents. So the sole proprietor, individual, puts up his own money to produce it. The only problem is growth. If he sells 100,000 cookies, he's got to figure out, he or she has got to figure out how to come up with the money not only for the ingredients, but what are called capital expenses, like having an oven that'll be big enough to do that. And this actually is the true story behind Amos Cookies, Mrs. Fields Cookies face that problem. Now, can an individual borrow from the bank to have that money? Probably not, because banks don't know how to bake cookies. So if the business fails, the banks would end up with equipment they don't know how to use. So what is necessary is coming together and taking on what are called investors. They put up the cash to get a piece of paper that they hope they can sell for more than what they paid for it. And we call that a capital gain. Now, the interesting thing about this is all voluntary. There's no coercion. In socialism, on the other hand, the rulers decide what's made. They decide who gets rich, and they do this to manipulate themselves so they can stay in power. Even in democratic socialism, coercion is the basis of the transaction, but not in a capitalist system. What's the so what? Well, this makes the rule of law critical for a capitalist economic system. In other words, rule of law means that everyone is treated equally before the law. The laws apply to everybody. You don't have one speed limit for rich people and one speed limit for poor people. The speed limit's the same for all vehicles. The business gets rewarded for for making what we want to buy. So private property rights, the right to own the bank, the right to own the company, those are critical rights for a capitalist system if you're going to avoid the use of coercion. History's been rather cruel this way. I could go back to empires, Genghis Khan and others, where theft, like wars of conquest, is how they finance their government. Slavery. All over the world, USA, Africa, Soviet Union, Asia, it's still being practiced in Africa and Asia. Super high taxation. Some countries like Sweden, yeah, they're a socialist country, but they tax you at 70%. You do get free education, but it's not to everybody. It's to only those top 15, 20% of the students that test well, and they get to go to college for free. Government debt, borrowing. A lot of emerging countries tried that. They just borrowed and borrowed and borrowed, and then they couldn't pay back their loans, so they had to have high taxes, and that kind of choked their economy. All of those things are coercive. Only in the capitalist system do you have the voluntary aggregation of capital. In other words, capital savings is voluntarily invested in promising businesses with the hopes that those businesses will do well, which is why in the Golden Goose Rule, you got to be careful. If you overtax, you discourage people from putting their savings at risk in new businesses. Okay, now I want you to stop, go to page 93, read the Bill of Rights, there are 10 of them, then go to the next video, PowerPoint Part 2, the Bill of Rights. And here again, I'm going to try to interpret this in terms of what it means for business and what it means for you. Thanks very much. Again, go back to the text now and be sure to read the whole text and also look at page 93 in particular.